Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the other side of counseling. I'm Samir Charles, and I'm with my co host, Pumza.
Hey guys, hi, welcome back.
And today we have a very special guest, founder of TherapyNow, wears many other hats. We welcome back Elza Burke, who's going to be discussing addiction with us today. Hello, Elza.
Hello, Samir. Hello, Pumza. Nice to see you guys.
Hello, hello.
So let's dive right in. Elza, tell us a little bit about your understanding or your perspective around what addiction is.
So I think addiction has taken many roles over the last couple of years, especially the last 50 years. But I think currently we are seeing so many new so much more new research that's being done on addiction. It's not a field that is looked at often in research. I think when it comes to actually looking at people that need peer support, especially around addiction. But my understanding of addiction is something that you need in order to self-soothe pain. So if you're going through a traumatic, and doesn't need to be traumatic, difficult time, something that is self-soothing. And for me, that means it doesn't have to be food, drugs, alcohol, pornography. It can be anything. It can be sport. It can be seen as unhealthy, healthy. It can be work. There's so many different ways that addiction can present itself. And I think that and I'm going to dive a bit deeper here and say that as a society, I think that we have decided what we feel is appropriate addictions and what we feel is inappropriate addictions. And I think that that's really unfair because, we throw millions and millions and millions of dollars or rands at sport. And we don't look at the aspect that, our sports people are training, missing family things. They are training even if they're injured or hurt. And we never question why. We never dive deeper into that person's life. But then when the person has a breakdown or ends up struggling, we're like so shocked, like, why is that happening? And I think that is once again, society making or, looking at these things and saying like it's healthy. Yeah. And I feel like it should be looked at more deeper. And then we've demonized a whole lot of other addictions.
Elza, you have made a mark for yourself when it comes to speaking about addictions. We've seen you on multiple different platforms, being part of different panels, as well, being invited to speak on the topic. So it just shows that you have a lot of passion around the topic, which includes addiction, and it's beautiful to see. So could you tell us more? Where does that passion stem from? Where does it come from?
So I actually had therapy yesterday and I was speaking to my therapist about it. And he was like, because I was like, I can't shut it down. Like this absolute obsession, I would say. And if we can look at an addiction, I would say that's one of them. But an obsession with wanting to help people, especially when it comes into the addiction field and human rights, with individuals that go through an addiction. And I know for me, my addiction comes from childhood trauma and my journey going through a substance abuse and an eating disorder, and then going through a treatment center and then working in treatment centers. So I feel like I've been on both sides as a patient and then as a counselor, and watching human rights violations when it comes to addiction. And then now and then going into a trauma-informed space where we were treating individuals that are going through trauma and then experienced trauma and then had an addiction, and looking at the fact that many of those individuals had been through several different treatment centers. So they kept being labeled as relapsed. And, we do look at morals and all of those kind of things that come with it. So I feel like my passions come from watching human rights violations and stigmatization around addiction for myself and for others. So yeah, that's really, I would say, where it comes from.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that what you were saying also, for me, it really brings up something that's been trending a lot. This idea of habits. And for me, it's so fascinating because the way you were describing addiction, it is for me synonymous with a habit. Yet when having these discussions, the habit seems like something positive, like we're trying to cultivate something beautiful, shift our lifestyle. Yet when we speak about addiction, we don't always associate the two. So it's like, yes, it is a habit that we have, but the tone, the way it's viewed, or the perspective is so different. Do you have any thoughts around how come that is?
I think the reason for that is when we look at the habits of addiction. And I recently was in a lecture, and the lecturer themselves actually spoke about addiction and said, when you work with the addict, and I think I was like horrified, because I was like, it's a bit like saying, just the word on its own, it's like we're labeling that person. And she said, when we work with the addict, we've got to realize that they're stealing, they're probably lying, and they're probably being very deceitful and extremely manipulative. And that was all. We don't know the person's history. We don't know where they've come from. We don't know what they've been through, but we've already put that label on that person. So I think when it comes to habitual using, and when we look at addiction in particular, there is that massive stigma around it that this person is criminal. And I think that it also goes with the fact that the substances they're using is often illegal, not in all countries, but in South Africa. And when label somebody that an alcoholic, we go, well, they're probably abusing their wife, and they're probably abusing their kids, and they're doing all of this stuff. So just with the word itself, there is so much other words that is not being said. And I think that's part of, if we look at habitual using as well, what we look at. And like I said, that was a lecturer, a well-educated person who's working in the addiction field. And that was her own perception of what's going on. So I feel like there needs to be re-education and re-information going out to everybody across all fields when it comes to addiction care, and what we need to be looking at, and the labels that we are putting on people that are, we don't know their history, but we're already labeling them. And that label's hard to shake once you've got it.
So I actually saw quite an interesting quote. I don't fully buy into the whole quote, but I'll share the quote as is. And the author's unknown, but it basically says, quote, addiction isn't about alcohol and drugs. It's the absence of self. This absence is described as a hole in your soul. You can't love others when you're feeling empty inside. Recovery peels back the painful layers and heals through that hole, and heals that hole through connection, honesty, and hard work. To love oneself is the beginning of a lifetime of recovery. End quote. So I thought that it was quite an interesting quote, because looking at addiction, there is those labels. And many times, like Elza mentioned, we demonize people and we don't see the humane elements of where does the pain stem from? And
Mm.
Elza mentioned childhood trauma. I mean, there's a whole range of things that could have led up to someone deciding to use initially. So, I mean, Elza, seeing that you have been in the field for over 20 years, what are your thoughts on what the quote was saying?
Well, there's parts of the code that I think which are very useful, which is the fact that there is pain. Do you know what I mean? And there's a lack of connection with oneself, or the connection with self is so painful that we need a buffer between ourselves and the connection, which I think does become the substance. I want to question the quote and say, what are we calling, what is recovery? Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, what is that? Because I think that that is another thing that when we look at addiction, what does that mean? And I feel like that is in South Africa, abstinence. Recovery is seen as abstinence. If you're abstinent from the substance, then you're in recovery. And that I question often, because I feel like it's often an unrealistic expectation. For someone to just stop using, and to also, if somebody's then not used or has had a slip or whatever we want to call it, to then say they are no longer in recovery. Like, that is a judgmental statement to make about somebody's journey. And you know why they had that slip. So I feel like everybody's recovery needs to be their decision as to what they feel their recovery journey should look like. Some people don't want to stay abstinent, and that is their human right choice. Do you know what I mean? But we have decided as a society and as professionals working in the addiction field, no, recovery should look like this. And that's not counseling. I mean, that's not individualized counseling. That's saying we're putting our views on you, and we're saying what this should look like. And that I would question quite harshly in the quote, because I don't believe in the abstinent model myself, but that's my viewpoint. Some people really do. I'm abstinent myself from substances. Sorry, my dog's walking around in the background. I myself am abstinent from substances, but I do know that what happens in addiction is the energy that you put into substances has to go somewhere. So when somebody's abstinent, where is that energy going? And that needs to be looked at then, because is it going into, all our work going into sobriety to make sure that we actually stay sober? Is that work going into getting another form of an addiction? And often in treatment centers, it's looked at as amazing as the person's now exercising and eating healthy and doing all of the things, but are they actually able to sit with themselves? Do you know what I mean? Like, so I feel like it's a complex version, but I do once again feel like everyone's vision on their recovery. Sorry, I have a dog problem. Everyone's vision on their recovery should be their own, and that should be personalized and individualized.
I love that you've mentioned recovery. I'd love to bring it home for the listeners and the viewers that are watching it, and bring it home in terms of when you have a partner, a sibling, a son or daughter that is within recovery. As someone that has worked within addiction for 20 years, how would you say that this person would now navigate second chances? Because second chances come with the mentality of this person that used to steal, or they still steal, and you start to doubt them and what they say. So how would you advise family members, loved ones that have people that have gone through addiction and they're now going through recovery to navigate second chances?
So I am a big believer in the fact that there has to be family counseling. So you don't know if somebody's going to use or not use, or steal or not steal. You don't know. And obviously trust needs to be built in that relationship. But that needs to once again be your decision as a parent or as a partner or as a family member as to what that decision needs to be for you. Do you know what I mean? So you get to have your boundaries around that and say to the person, look, if you're going to drink or you're going to steal, these are our family's boundaries. Like, you can't come to our house, or we're not going to lend you money, or whatever the family ends up deciding. But I don't believe cutting somebody out of your life and saying you'll never see them again, or if you have a relapse or relationship's over, you are threatening in a connection, and you're threatening a relationship, and you are, I feel, setting the person up for failure, because you're saying, if you don't behave the way that I want you to behave, you're out. So I feel like it's, once again, a bigger discussion, but it has to be between the boundaries that the family decides or the partner decides. It can't be the decision made by the counselor or the rehab or the institution. It has to be a decision made by the family and the person that's struggling with the addiction.
Mm.
I absolutely love that you also mentioned the basically person-centered counseling, and that it's not for anybody other than the people involved to decide. Because I think it reminds me also of the habits we spoke about earlier, where you have a specific trigger, a routine, and a reward or the reason behind. And like you were saying as well, if you look at the science behind it, energy cannot be created nor destroyed, only basically converted to another form. And it's the same with our energy as humans. So the energy we've put into something, we now kind of replace or displace. And a question I like to ask my clients as well is, when it comes to the habit formation, are the skills that you've used over your life still serving you the way that they used to? Or is there another set of coping skills that you could use that would add more value to your life right now? And it's for the person to decide. It's not for us to say, don't do this, do that. Which came out quite strongly, and I think is quite beautiful. Pumza was gonna say.
It is quite beautiful. But I love how Elsa puts it. I love the way that she views it as well. And with her view and her train of thought, I'd love to find out from her. As someone that believes that abstaining from that drug use that you were using might not be the best of ideas, or might not be the best approach. So that means that one will have to slowly reduce the usage of whatever it is that they were using, to a point where they can now be able to function and feel more human-like, unlike being someone that is addicted to whatever substance that was. So trying to now I'm looking at it from, I have a friend, or I have a member of my family that was going through recovery in that way, in that process, by slowly but surely reducing the usage of that substance that we're using. Now, what do I look out for as someone that has been on both sides, Elza? What would you say I would have to look out for if my family member is now reducing instead of decreasing the usage of whatever substance they were using?
You mean they're reducing the using?
If
Or
they were supposed
increasing
to
the
be
use?
reducing the usage, let's say, for example, they're using a certain substance, and they decided that the approach is not just to dead stop, but they will reduce it slowly to a point where they can function and they're okay as human beings. But now, what signs would I have to look out for if my family member or my friend is now increasing the usage? They're no longer reducing it, but they're using it more. What would you say I'd have to look out for as someone that has been on both sides for the long time that you worked with addiction?
So I really feel like you will drive yourself insane if you monitor somebody's using. So, I mean, you literally are, your whole world is going to revolve around, are they increasing or decreasing? My connection is determined on their, not using or not using as much or whatever. So with my own personal clients, and own personal journey. My dad was drinking heavily for a really long time, and I remember the times when he would drink, how anxiety provoking it was, because we didn't know what was going to happen, and what the consequence of his drinking. And his mood did change. He did change as a person, when he became quite aggressive and quite mean when he was drinking. So, I understand that it's really, really hard when you're in that position where you can watch somebody spiraling and the fear that it creates inside of you. But it's not my responsibility to monitor anybody's substance abuse regarding how much they are consuming and how they're not consuming. My biggest thing is about creating an honest space to have a conversation around the fact that I am increasing my using because I'm really struggling. And right now, because of that, I think that it's better that we just stay in WhatsApp contact, or that we just take some distance, or that when we go for coffee, it's going to be in times when I'm not increasing my using. Do you know what I mean? So it becomes a conversation instead of you're going to be reprimanded. And then I highly recommend for the person that is supporting the person that's increasing their using at that time to seek therapy, to look at why they are in this relationship and why they are so determined for this person to stop. Because it's really about stuff going on inside of you that you're struggling to look at, and that's why you're in this relationship, because then you can put all the focus on that person's using instead of having to look at yourself. So my thing is to pull the energy back to you and go, what is going on for me? If this person is really, really struggling with addiction, I understand it's not their choice, but I have a choice in myself to decide what behavior I'm okay with and behavior I'm not okay with. That to me is very important. And lastly, I just want to say I've worked with a lot of with men and women that are parents that struggle with in particular alcohol, and that when they do drink they become really aggressive. And my conversations with the family is rather have the person be able to be honest with you, do you know what I mean, and say, I'm going to go out and drink heavily tonight. And then there can be a safety plan for the family where they can say, well, then you can't come home. We still love you, but you need to sleep in a hotel, or you need to go sleep over at a friend, or you need to do something, because it's not safe for us for you to be at home when you're that intoxicated. So you build a safety plan, but it's built on honesty. And I think what we've done, and with the stigma around substance abuse, is that if you are drinking heavily, we cut off the relationship. And that's why people are not honest, because they're saying, I don't have a choice. I'm doing this. But then it's for the family to have a safety plan for themselves.
No, I do love that approach. I do love that approach. And it's an approach that a lot of people don't see, because usually what we hear in our communities and our families is that do not go near this person. They've messed up ABCD. They're no longer good people. They're doing all of these things. So having this re-education, as you stated in the beginning, would be very important for everybody, all inclusive, even those that are within our mental health community. Having that re-education and having that open dialogue with everyone, including those that are watching, but also professionals as well, will be beneficial for everyone that is involved. Sam, do you have anything to add?
So I think in closing, for me, I feel I'd like to sum up with a quote that's somewhat related, but also not. And the quote is, may kindness and love prevail in the heart and mind of humanity. Because I think it's that love and that connection that binds us together and will allow us to move forward with respect, with compassion and empathy ultimately, so that we can move forward together as a collective instead of breaking ourselves apart. And I think that togetherness, in African culture, there's talk of Ubuntu. And I think it's that Ubuntu and that togetherness that brings with it deep healing for our society. Thank you. very much, Elza, for stopping by today and having a beautiful
Thanks for having
conversation
me.
with us.
Thank
It
you
is
so
amazing to have
much.
Elza in the podcast for today. As she has stated, she's mentioned a lot of important things. She has mentioned that if you are struggling with an addiction, reach out for help. If you do not feel safe, if you do not feel like you cannot communicate with those that are around you, you can reach out for a counselor. We've got multiple counselors on Therapy Now, which is available on www.therapynow.co.za. And you can choose anyone that you'd like to have as a counselor. And also family members, if you are having anyone that has a drug addiction, if they are not ready to come forward, why not come forward yourself and equip yourself with the right communication skills for you to continue to speak to that person. So Elza, do you have any closing remarks before we say goodbye officially?
Thank you for having me. I think it's such an honor to be part of this podcast. I really love it. So thanks for having me. And I think for me, like one of the things I often say to people is we're always talking about the opposite of addiction is connection. And for me, it's the connection with self. And that connection is super, super hard. All of us are running on the treadmill of life at the moment and going, there isn't time to slow down. So for me, it's about acknowledging that that's part of why people struggle with addiction, because they also can't slow down. So we all struggle with connecting with ourselves. So maybe just leave you with that. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Bye, everyone.
Until next time.